Okay, well, I hope you've had a chance to get some sustenance, stretch your legs, and do those kinds of things. And the next portion, we're going to maybe do a little bit. I think I'd prefer to have an extra 15 minutes in the afternoon, so I think I'm going to do only about 35, 40 minutes. Then we'll go. You'll still have an hour for lunch. But you know, if you're a teacher in middle school or high school, I don't know about you community college folks, if you're a teacher in middle school or high school, you're lucky if you get 30 minutes. So an hour is like, what am I going to do with an hour, right? In fact, I kind of told Ron that. I'm like, why are you giving him an hour for lunch? And I don't know, if we could do lunch in 45 minutes and move it up, you might even get out earlier. Give it some thought. Okay, well, what we just saw about building community, now we're going to move to the third part of this film, which is from citizens to outcasts. And I would venture to say that in some ways this is maybe what tends to get more emphasis in talking about the Holocaust than building community. I don't think sometimes we don't focus on that, because you had to build a community of us to be able to have it so easy to create the outcasts. Those two things go hand in glove, I think. So what I would like for you to think about as you watch this, and this one is again about 6 minutes. I ask you with community, how does a society or a government create community? Okay? All right. The flip side of that is, how do you create outcasts? How does any society or government go about completely excluding one or more groups? And if you're going to try that, what kinds of propaganda, education, do you have to use to make people believe that in fact that group is the other, that group has no value? Now, actually, Ray Farr, by the way, I think I mentioned, who is the narrator of this, is an extraordinary woman. She's now retired from the museum, but she was the driving force in the creation of the permanent exhibition at the museum. And an extraordinary woman, and she's the narrator on a number of the museum's films. But you heard her mention about life unworthy of life. She just mentioned it and then kind of went on, and I had mentioned that. So we know that one of these groups, and of course we know from our knowledge that another group is Jews. But without further ado, let's watch this 6-minute
Before the Nazis assumed power, Jews enjoyed all rights of citizenship in Germany. After 1933, the German government gradually excluded Jews from public life and public education. Newly established Jewish private schools provided a safe learning environment for some. By 1938, German authorities had isolated and segregated Germany's Jews, expelling them from the professions and eliminating most opportunities to earn a living.
We felt so, why can't we be part of it? Why can't we? Everybody said, Heil Hitler, like this. I did too. What did I know? I was 8 years old. So my mother said to me, you're not supposed to do that. I said, why not? She said, haven't you been told that you were Jewish? I said, oh, I forgot.
Germany's Jews would get plenty of reminders.
Meine Herrschaften, hier ist Boykott in jüdischen Wahlhäusern. Gehen Sie doch bitte weiter.
This sense of isolation that came upon us after 1933, gradual and increasing. It also affected us psychologically. We knew we were in a hostile world.
Between 1933 and 1939, the German government enacted hundreds of laws to define, segregate, and impoverish German Jews.
My sister and I used to slink by those those huge banners that were all over the city, and we used to just try not to see them, thinking if we didn't see them, they weren't there. But they were there. That's just little by little that really took over.
Wer selig geworden ist, der weiß, ohne Lösung der Judenfrage keine Lösung der Menschheit.
The goal of Nazi propaganda was to demonize Jews and encourage Germans to see Jews as dangerous outsiders in their midst. After 1935, everyday anti-Semitism was a regular part of carnival parades and floats. Public displays of anti-Semitism reinforced a climate of hostility toward Jews in Germany, or at the least, indifference to their treatment. In March 1938, German troops moved into neighboring Austria. Germany shredded another provision of the Versailles Treaty as Hitler's homeland was incorporated into Germany. It was a disaster for Austrian Jews. Within a year, the Nazis achieved in Austria what had taken 5 years to carry out in Germany. On November 9th, the Nazi Party orchestrated an outbreak of anti-Jewish violence throughout Greater Germany. It was a lawless onslaught that outraged the world and provoked criticism of the regime by many Germans. Jewish businesses that had already suffered anti-Semitic attacks were targeted for deliberate vandalism disguised as spontaneous public action. Party officials directed the SA, SS, and Hitler Youth to destroy Jewish shops and torch synagogues. Over 7,000 Jewish-owned businesses were vandalized. Germans named the violent attacks Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, for the shattered windows of Jewish-owned stores that littered the streets. The nationwide violence damaged or destroyed more than 250 synagogues.
After Kristallnacht, I remember driving through Berlin and seeing the synagogues in flames and all the glass on the streets and the people huddled and depressed. They walked around like the victims, like the hunted.
German police filled the concentration camps with thousands of Jewish inmates. The SS released them only if they agreed to emigrate. But Jews faced increasingly restrictive immigration quotas in most countries and bureaucratic hurdles in Germany. A new law, issued in October 1938, required Jews to surrender their old passports, which would be valid only after the letter J was stamped on them. 2 months later, another law prevented the flight of capital owned by Jews when the Economics Ministry froze all Jewish property and assets. Many, who had the means and somewhere to go, tried to leave Germany. Some families sent their children alone to other, safer countries. They could not know how soon the world would be at war.
Okay. Well, this is curious. Let me see if I can find my way back. Why don't I have my collections? I can find them, but I think I'm going to have to go. That's weird. Okay, well, while I deal with this, there's the film. Collections has gotten, I don't think this is going to work. But. Okay, all right. while I have to fix this, let's talk for a minute about the kinds of images, the kinds of things that are there. What are the tactics that any society might use to get rid of outcasts, to make outcasts?
Isolation.
Isolation, okay? What else?
What's this characterization of the Jewish person and exaggeration of features that are considered to be undesirable, which allows for an easier mockery of that person and people who identify with that group.
Okay, I don't know that you all could hear that, but isolating, okay. And what? Okay, scapegoating, yeah.
Mistrust.
Okay,
Dehumanizing.
okay.
Government approved public violence towards them.
Yeah, there's a real sense of publicly approved violence, right? Well, we're not going there politically today, are we? Okay. All right. Okay. We don't need to, to beat dead horses here. Let's take a look at some of the posters that were used. I had mentioned earlier on about the comments about mentally and physically handicapped, and again, to go in and see this, again, we don't have a specific date, but what this basically says is that this hereditary ill person will cost our national community 60,000 Reichmarks over the course of his lifetime. Citizens, this is your money. This is your money being used. Now, this to me is an interesting poster because it deviates, I think, a little bit from what we were seeing with some of the others. How is this one different? Not just in that it's focusing on mentally and physically handicapped, but think of the visuals. Think of amount of, I'm giving it away, think of amount of text, think of amount of, what do we see?
I'm focused more on the language. Again, as that other poster you showed earlier with the man, the woman, and the baby, and the words, the neues Volk.
Mm-hmm.
And what does the neues Volk, the new people. So already there's putting the idea that for the neues Volk, or for the new community, the new people, these people have to be removed from it.
Yeah.
Also, he's a doctor, which shows some kind of authority. And then the creepy hand where he's like comforting the guy.
Yeah, and whether he's a doctor, he's certainly medical.
Right.
And one of the, well, let me have this one.
I was gonna say, the first thing I noticed was the number at the top, which is the right marks. Because if I'm somebody who's just coming off of not having income and getting some, if I see that much, I'm gonna think, oh, well, that would make my life a whole lot better if I wasn't spending it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole symbolism of certain people, their life doesn't have a value, so we have the right to extinguish it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a message that's being given, like when they show the medical person, with his arm, it's like, we're gonna put this person out of this misery or something like that, not to deliver it as somebody just being killed in cold blood, to try to maybe get that message across. We're doing it for the person.
We're doing a mercy killing we haven't done it yet because I know this is probably the early 30s. So the euthanasia program doesn't come about until 1939. But in the same way that if you're 17, join the Waffen-SS, right, in 33 or whatever, the seeds again, and I'm not going to go with what haunts me. That's not.
I'm wondering if the yellow is symbolic because the yellow was used for the Course of Stars, and I noticed in the film they were saying these yellow benches. Yellow seemed to be a
Yep.
color of outside.
Yeah, you don't see any bright reds and powerful colors here, right? Yellow is, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
They also have the brilliant doctor in white and the undesirable person in black. And psychologically, we always
Okay. Now, let's think for a minute about what this poster is saying to this community. It's saying that some lives aren't worthy, right? And the comment about if you've not had a job or you've lost your job in the 20s, the Great Depression comes, you're starting to get back on your feet, and somebody says, how's that person going to be beneficial to this economy? They aren't, right? They're a drag on the economy. But you have to, in some way, convince people of that, I think, right? I may be very naive, but I think to get real buy-in from the community, right, you've got to convince them that there is a group of people that isn't worthy because they're a drag on society and they're costing us money. And one of the most important things in this period in Germany was the rebuilding of the Reich, right? With racial superiority, racial politics. And if you couldn't support and be a part of growing the economy and growing the Volk, you didn't have value. You didn't have value. That's one reason why women got medals for having more children. They did, right? The more children you had, the bigger your medal was, or the different kind of medal it was. Because we have to build the Aryan Volk. It's another reason they started the sterilization program in '33. They didn't kill the people in the mental institutions yet. They sterilized. Okay? Yes?
You don't have to actually reduce 60,000 Reich marks as the cost. You can lie.
Well, that's very true. You can lie. Yes.
It's almost like they try to use the amount of Reich marks as a choice that you could be saving this much money, but they're kind of also giving that person's life the value of only over his entire course of life. His value is only worth this much. Kind of giving you the impression that, well, as a healthy, normally developed person, your life is worth so much more, and that you're superior than them. If that kind of makes sense.
Right, okay, good. I think you all could hear that. Yes, thank you.
There's a common theme. For example, when you said the yacht, very simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
Here, they're appealing to German selfishness.
Okay.
You can save 60,000 Reich marks
Right.
apiece. And I think it's an appeal to selfishness.
Okay. Selfishness. Yes, sir.
Well, that put a lot of pressure on women having their children. They have to be healthy.
Yes, yeah. But now, in terms of the sterilization program, I mean, this is kind of a strange poster, the more I think about this poster, because it isn't saying kill them. It isn't saying sterilize them. What's its message? They're not worthy of life, right? But it doesn't take the next step, right? But it's placed in everybody's mind, they're not worthy, okay? But do keep in mind that in Buck versus Bell in 1928 in North Carolina, Virginia, our Supreme Court said it was okay to sterilize mentally deficient people. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, in his decision, said that it was because the Buck young woman had become pregnant, her mother had become pregnant out of wedlock, and they were both institutionalized. And the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court said, 2 generations of imbeciles is enough. It's okay to sterilize. So it wasn't just there. The eugenics program was very, very popular in this country. And it started here, yes. So we want to keep a bigger picture, but we don't want to keep too big right now. Okay, let's look at then another. Now notice, first was appealing to selfishness, right? Cost. Here, life without hope. Now this is in about 34. Reactions. What do we see here?
They're already caged.
They're caged, yeah, because remember, most people, as was the case in the United States, most people who were mentally and physically disabled and challenged were in institutions. Okay? It was being done here. What? Well, they are smiling. I mean, maybe I don't know, but this is different from that other one, right? the other one appealing to the selfishness, and I like that, you know, the cost, how they're going to drag things down. Where's the focus with this one? Life without hope. Yeah, I mean, it almost turns it on them, right? Why would they want to live? Oh, these poor people. Why would they want to live if, right? And these things are going on now in the 30s, early 30s. This is 34. And yes, the euthanasia program was underground, but the seeds were planted long before. Okay, we talked, when we saw about building a community, and all those images of children and the images of the community, of the family rather. As I mentioned before, education was it is an incredibly powerful tool, period. I would say. It is incredibly powerful. And as teachers, we have to be careful how we deal with things. In Nazi Germany, they basically rewrote the curriculum across the board. And one of the books that was so popular was this Poison Mushroom. Now, how many of you know about this book? It's fairly a few. Okay, well, if you will bear with me and correct me if I'm wrong, but in this book, which is kind of a series of vignettes and short stories, you know, young people in Germany like to go out mushroom hunting. And so, and this was extremely popular book in schools and in families. They like to go out mushroom hunting, but you have to be careful because some mushrooms are poisonous. So you have to be able to distinguish between a poison mushroom and a non-poison mushroom. You have to be careful and know how to do it because the poison mushrooms are the Jews. Okay? Now, was it Skittles we heard a reference to not too long ago? Right? I mean, this poison mushroom, right? You got to know how to recognize them because they're the Jews and they can hurt you. Now, there were also board games. I don't have any images of them, but when we had State of Deception, we had on display in that exhibit board games. And there was a board game called Juden Raus, Jews Out, that was played in families and in homes. And I remember I asked the curator at one point of that exhibition, I said, how many families, how widespread do you think these board games were? And he said, you know, we don't really know. We know they were produced, we know they were purchased, but it's like, you know, how many boxes of Monopoly do you have in your house, right? I mean, they don't really know how many people actually played the game. But if we think about the power of having books that talk about Jews being poison mushrooms, you have board games that say Jews out, and that was the goal. The goal was to play around and you moved your little thing and then you won if you got all your Jews out. Right? Think about what that would do to young people's minds. And how, at one level, can you fight that if it's that pervasive? If it's gotten to that point.
I'm not familiar with this book. Did it outright say that the Jews were the mushrooms? Or
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Right? Those of you who know the book, right? It's...
not subtle at all. Okay.
Yeah, it's a series of stories. I think there are 17 or so, and it talks all about how they have to be careful because some mushrooms are poisonous, and at the end it's like, and just like there are some poisonous mushrooms, there are some poisonous Jews, and you have to beware of them.
So it outright
It's very obvious.
Yeah, it's very, very... There's nothing subtle.
With the face of a Jewish person. It's very blatant.
Yeah.
If you pull the info, it shows exactly what the bottom sentiment says, and it says, just as it is very often to tell the poisonous mushroom from the edible mushrooms, it's often very difficult to recognize Jews as thieves and criminals. So
Yeah.
very, very
Yeah. Yep. And I'm sorry, but I think most young people would have real trouble being surrounded by this, not falling for it, if you will. You know? I mean, yes.
Well, I think the fact that later on, you had German youth denouncing their own parents is a prime example of how indoctrinated these kids became.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, if you're getting it in the Hitler Youth, you're getting it in the girls' groups, you're getting it in school, you're getting it everywhere. Okay? Okay, this is kind of the depressing. Okay. I just wanted to, the Nuremberg race laws, which came about in September of 35, and which were, of course, as I'm sure you all know, critical in terms of Jewish being a part of the community. One of the things that has always astonished me is how, in fact, virtually everything the Nazi Party did and the government did was legal, because they made laws. And if you think about that, the power of a law, they made it law that they were going to sterilize mentally and physically handicapped. They made it law that if you were a Jewish doctor, you couldn't have Aryan patients. They made it law that if you were a Jewish kid, you couldn't go to school with an Aryan kid, right? They made it law, they made it law, they made it law. And what happens to a country, a community, a society when you've made it law? If you know the exhibit in the museum, on the 4th floor, there is a section that's about laws. And they have a rolling list of the laws that were implemented from January of 33 to April, probably May of 45. I honestly don't know how long you'd have to stand there to watch them. And when I'm up there fairly frequently, and I always look for a little bit. I mean, and it's things, it isn't just, you can't go to school with them. It's little, you have to be off the streets at a certain time. You can't buy bread at a certain place. I mean, the minutia of the laws that were passed to disengage and ostracize Jews is astonishing. But it was legal in that society. So this, which is always kind of hard for me and was for my students to understand, I just want to have it on there so that if you want to talk about, this was a thing trying to explain if you had Jewish grandparents, parents, and of course I'm sure you all know that if you had any Jewish grandparents or parents, you were considered a Jew. You could be a half Jew, okay? But, you had to define it, and that was always a big problem until the race laws. Now this particular poster, which is fairly commonplace in lots of things, is about 1935 when the Nuremberg race laws were introduced, was on the front of Der Stürmer magazine. And I'm sure you all know about Julius Streicher and that magazine. And this was a special issue on race pollution, okay? Race pollution. Now this, and some of you obviously read German, and I don't, but even if you don't read German, what is this showing?
Well, the man on the left is ugly, he's painted, he's dark coloring, threatening looking, and he looks like he's somehow threatening the woman on the right, who's very fair, with long hair, and she looks very anxious about him, and so forth. So clearly one looks so-called racially superior, and one racially inferior.
He looks like Lucifer, yeah. And she certainly does not seem like she's very eager for any interaction, right? Okay. So even if you don't know German, you get a message. And you get a message of exclusion. And you get a message of threat, right? These people are a threat. And one of the interesting things, and this kind of imagery comes up quite frequently in this exclusionary propaganda. I hate to even have to say it, given the current political scene, but one of the tropes was Jewish men are going to defile the women, the white women. That's what's going to happen. That's what they do. Jewish men are going to defile the Aryan women. And that is the sense you get, right? They are seen as very much sexual threats to Aryan women.
There's the same kind of imagery from
women.
And then the same thing with African American.
Yeah, so the use with the Chinese and the end of the against Chinese, and yes, I mean, look, nobody here, none of us can act as if we live in a society that is free of any of this. You know, it's there. I think the thing that we see in Germany at this time, and I would say that having the dictatorship was also a major factor. You know, once he became dictator, then in a sense it was almost over. I mean, because it truly could be implemented whatever he wanted, and then those in the Reichstag wanted, and many Germans wanted. So no, none of our faces is really, our hands are really clean here. You know, it's just sometimes it doesn't go as far as this went. Now, I've got just 3 more, and then we're going to break about 15 minutes early, not to give you more lunch time, but to give me 15 minutes more in the afternoon. So we're just going to move 15 minutes up, okay? Okay, this kind of, I don't even like looking at these images, frankly, but this shows, and this 1930, sometime in 1933 to 1945, they actually had a Hitler Youth educational presentation, and if you can read this, Germany overcomes Jewry. This was one of the other propaganda techniques they used. They had these educational presentations for the Hitler Youth. And they were on different topics. But most of them were, the Jew is your enemy, okay? And so, now imagine, this is an educational presentation for Hitler Youth, and that's what they're seeing. So it isn't just the Jew who is a bastard, right? It's Orientals or Asians, right? Black folk. Those of you who speak.
I think they mean by the term bastard, not as in how we're interpreting it, but that the Jew is not pure, the Jew is a mix of,
Yes.
of these elements.
Right. Is a polyglot, right. And all of these are undesirable. So if the mixture ends up here, it makes them even more undesirable. Yes. Okay? I don't know that we need to dwell on that one that much. And then a major form of propaganda in 35, 36, they had a big exhibition called The Eternal Jew. And there were big posters of this up in the cities, and it was in Munich. And as this points out, it was The Eternal Jew. It was held at a library in the Deutsches Museum in Munich. It actually, I think, was in 36 and 37, but there were not only publications about the Eternal Jew, but there were big, on the sides of buildings, big posters of this. Now, let's deconstruct this just for a couple, 3 minutes. What is being said? The Eternal Jew. What do we see here? What are the images being used?
The Jew is behind communism and the Jew is behind it.
Yeah, you know, one of the ironies, that's maybe a light word for it, is in their ideology, they said that the Jew was a capitalist and a communist. They were responsible for both. I don't quite know how, but yeah, you know, communism and capitalism. Okay. What else?
The words, the Eternal Jew, the words are in German, but the lettering looks like Hebrew.
Yes, yes, exactly. Oh, you guys are so good. I love working with you. Okay. Anything else?
Violence, causing trouble with the whip, and hurt folks.
Yes. This whip, I have heard many, many, many explanations of that. I don't know what you would see, but certainly it is again, the Jew can be violent.
I think it's domination more than violence.
Domination, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also, I see parallels between this and one of the previous slides about the handicap, because this man's body is twisted. And
That's right, yes, it is.
It's not like the German doctor with the lean face and the erect body with the squared shoulders. This man clearly isn't fit to live. You know, he falls into many categories.
Yes, exactly.
And once again, the prevalence of the yellow background, which is symbolic of the yellow Star of David that they have to wear on their clothes so that they're labeled and branded as undesirable.
Yes, Yes. Yes.
It's striking too that it's a museum exhibit.
Yeah.
High culture here.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. But it was a museum, yeah. And it was very, very popular. Very popular.
The symbol of Russia with the shape of the country, because that was also in the back of the Germans' mind, that the Russians could invade their country and threaten their way of life.
Mm-hmm.
The figure is more like the Ostjuden, not the German Jew. And I think they're kind of linking the German Jews, they might look like you and me, but behind it, they're really like the Ostjuden.
Okay, so kind of making a community of all Jews, whether they were German or Austrian, but
Like the Eastern.
the Eastern.
Polish with the kaftan.
Right, right, right. Yes, because look, we have to remember this. I don't know, do you know what percentage of Germany was Jewish in 1933?
Well, it was, I think,
Yeah.
I think the country has something like 80 million people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that there were 500,000 Jews in all of Germany.
Mm-hmm. How about a percentage? Anybody?
8.8% or 8.5%?
No. Well, yes. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. No, it was less than 1%.
Oh, 0.8%.
Oh, 0.8. Yes. The Jewish population in Germany in 1933, January, was less than 1% of the whole population of Germany. That, my friends, was the enemy. Fewer, shouldn't have said less than, fewer than 1% of the population in Germany, 1933, were Jewish. In Poland, once the war started in September of 39, fewer than 10% were Jewish. But they were very different because many of them lived on shtetls, they were not speaking Polish. Those Jews in Germany were integrated, had intermarried. It was that's one reason they needed the Jewish laws, racial laws in September 35, because they couldn't figure out, really, unless they went to synagogue, rolls, or somebody happened to celebrate Hanukkah or something, they couldn't tell who was who. But less than 1% was Jewish. And that still just astonishes me, how that group could be seen as the enemy.
You had 70,000 that were Mischlinge first degree and 40,000 that were Mischlinge second degree.
And of course, that means they were seen, may as well have been full, right? Okay, one more. Night of Broken Glass, which will be commemorated in about 5 days, right? We know it was an orchestrated, pre-planned act of a pogrom, and I would imagine you do know the story of Herschel Greenspan, who was the young man who, and if you don't, and this is what, sorry, but I just love this site, because if you don't know that as the teacher, you don't have to spend a lot of time. Right here, it talks about what he did. Okay, that he fled, that he was living in Paris. His family, his mother and father, were very much destitute, and he went into the German embassy in Paris and assassinated Ernst von Roth. Okay, but if you're using this site, you don't have to go Google all that. Right there it is for you and your students. So, what is this then? This is an advertisement, if you will, a thing about the horrible things that this young man did, and it's, of course, a justification of Kristallnacht. Because, of course, there had been an attack, right? And so I wanted, because this is a little bit different kind of propaganda, I think. And, you notice you have Herschel Greenspan's picture, it was a poster, but in German it says, "Enough of this pack of criminals. Germans are not fair game for Jewish criminals. Now the cup is full." Okay? So, with this, unless anybody has any immediate questions, comments, we're going to walk over to the cafeteria. Do you all know where that is? Okay. Now, here... Okay, who will help? Okay, now let's see. You all are so phenomenal. It's now a little after noon, all right? Minimally by 1 o'clock, I want us to start the photo narrative. Okay? Deal? And middle school and high school people, enjoy a long lunch.